All right, hello. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel where we look at a lot of the theories of everything that have been, um, dug out, discovered by um, a lot of different people who nobody's ever heard of before. So that's kind of my niche there. My research is kind of comparative cosmology, or as Terence McKenna called it, cosmology. A lot of different theories of everything, and trying to maybe find a little bit of common ground between all of them. But today is the 146th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory. And this is a theory of everything from Dewey B. Larson, a system of theory. This means that if you understand how the system works, you can take this system and plug it into whatever subject you like, and you can come up with solid answers that make sense and in general are usually quite simple. That doesn't mean that the system is simple. There's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, and some of the concepts are a little bit slippery as well, and some of the terminology is very difficult to hang on to, and you know that's the nature of the game. When you're trying to come up with a new language, or when you're trying to come up with new theory, you generally have to invent a new language, and sometimes the language goes over, and sometimes it becomes kind of confusing. And in Mr. Larson's case here with the reciprocal system, he probably would maybe change a little bit of his terminology. Um, and also, Larson did make some mistakes, and he admitted that he was subject to make mistakes. He said that the system itself is correct. Whether I have applied the system correctly in all instances is another matter. But if I haven't applied it correctly, the mistakes will become apparent over time, and they will be correctable. So that's kind of where we are with the theory. Larson died back in 1990. A few notable people really have moved the theory forward since then, but very, very few people understand the reciprocal system, and very few even know about it. To know about it is one thing, but to understand it is something else, because you really have to read several of his books to really kind of get the gist of it. So that's what we're trying to do here. I'm trying to kind of set up a library of Dewey Larson's books and other important articles and books on the reciprocal system, especially stuff that was done by K.B.K. Nehru and Bruce Perret. And those will be coming pretty soon. But right now we're looking at Larson's book called Nothing But Motion. This is the first book of a three-volume series that he wrote when he was in his 80s. So there's hope for all of us, unless you're in your 90s. Then I think actually his final book might have, no, he was in his 80s for all of these books. And the series is called The Structure of the Physical Universe. Nothing But Motion really has to do mostly with physics and chemistry, organic chemistry especially. And we are in chapter 4 here that is called radiation. The basic idea behind Larson's system is that we live in a universe of motion, not a universe of matter, not a universe of energy. Matter and energy are just different kinds of motion. So we live in a universe of motion, and motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time have a generalized reciprocal relationship, hence the term the reciprocal system. And that means that they basically both are multidimensional, they both flow and progress, and they both come in discrete units. And hopefully from there, we can start our understanding. And I'll just let Larson speak from here. Again, this is coming from early in chapter 4, a chapter on radiation. As explained in chapter 3, motion, as herein defined, is a continuous process, a progression, not a succession of jumps. There is progression even within the units, simply because these are units of progression, or scalar motion. For this reason, specific points within the unit, the midpoint, for example, can be identified, even though they do not exist independently. The same is true of the chain used as an analogy in the preceding discussion. Although the chain exists only in discrete units or links, we can distinguish various portions of a link. For instance, if we utilize a chain as a means of measurement, we can measure 10.5 links, even though half of a link would not qualify as part of the chain. Because of this capability of identifying the different portions of the unit, we see the vibrating unit as following a definite path. Now, the stuff that he's talking about here is the very stuff that Dr. Bruce Perret really took him to task on, posthumously. And Nehru too, and both Nehru and Perret have bought into a different concept of the photon. And so Perret and Nehru see the photon as a birotation, two counter-rotating units. When you cancel them out, I think Euler, this is maybe Euler, the epsilon function, the interference between two counter-rotating systems is a wave. And so that is what they have come up with. And Perret definitely was taking Larson to task on this particular paragraph, that motion is a continuous process, even within the units, because these are units of progression or scalar motion. I always kind of felt that Perret didn't give Larson a proper hearing here, and that he was a little bit presumptuous to move on from what Larson thought. But we will definitely be tackling those issues when we do look at some of Perret's and Nehru's writings. But for now, we're just going to go with this conception of the photon that Larson has derived, and then we might learn more by seeing the juxtaposition of both of them at the same time. Back to Larson. In defining this path, we will need to give some detailed consideration to the matter of direction. In the first edition, the word direction was used in 4 different senses. Now, he's referring to the first edition of this structure of the physical universe. He originally wrote this back in 1959, and then he revamped it in the 80s. Or this book is from 1979, so the late 70s to the 80s. And so apparently he's changed this word direction. In the first edition, the word direction was used in 4 different senses. Exception was taken to this practice by a number of readers who suggested that it would be helpful if direction were employed with only one significance, and different names were attached to the other 3 concepts. When considered purely from a technical standpoint, the earlier terminology is not open to legitimate criticism, as using words in more than one sense is unavoidable in the English language. However, anything that can be done to facilitate understanding of the presentation is worth serious consideration. Unfortunately, there is no suitable substitute for direction in most of these applications. And again, so this is kind of getting to what I was talking about earlier, how Larson had to come up with a whole new language to express what he was talking about. Or even if he's not using new words, he's using familiar words in a new way. And you can see here that he's grappling with it. He's listening to people that are saying, look, the way you're using direction is confusing. But it's one thing to kind of see the problem and another thing to kind of come up with a solution to it. Back to Larson. Some of the objections to the previous terminology were based on the ground that scalar quantities, by definition, have no direction, and that using the term direction in application to these quantities, as well as to vectorial quantities, is contradictory and leads to confusion. There is merit in this objection, to be sure, in any application where we deal with scalar quantities merely as positive and negative magnitudes. But as soon as we view the scalar motions in the context of a fixed spatial reference system and begin talking about outward and inward, as we must do in this work, we are referring not to the scalar magnitudes themselves, but to the representation of these magnitudes in a stationary spatial reference system, a representation that is inevitably directional. The use of directional language in this case, therefore, appears to be unavoidable. Okay, when you're dealing with scalar magnitudes, when he's referring to direction, he's just referring to outward and inward. Okay, there's only two directions of scalar magnitudes. This, again, the analogy that you use, I've said this a million times, but the analogy you use is a balloon and a magic marker. You put a bunch of dots on the balloon. When you blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other, but in no particular direction. But it's actually in the outward direction. That's the only qualifier there is it's outward. And when you suck in the balloon, all of the dots move toward each other, but inward. They're moving inward. But there's no specific vectorial direction. You can't say they're moving east by northeast or something like that. Now, another analogy that you would use for scalar motion to get another dimension in there is instead of just using like 2 dimensions on a surface, you can also use something like raisin bread. So where all of, as you cook the raisin bread, all of the raisins move away from each other. Okay. Back to more Larson. There are likewise some compelling reasons for continuing to use the term direction in time in application to the temporal property analogous to the spatial property of direction. We could, of course, coin a new word for this purpose, and there would no doubt be certain advantages in so doing. But there are also some very definite advantages to be gained by utilizing the word direction with reference to time, as well as with reference to space. Because of the symmetry of space and time, the property of time that corresponds to the familiar property of space that we call direction, has exactly the same characteristics as the spatial property. And by using the term direction in time, or temporal direction, as a name for this property, we convey an immediate understanding of its nature and characteristics that would otherwise require a great deal of discussion and explanation. All that is then necessary is to keep in mind that although direction in time is like direction in space, it is not direction in space. So if you're talking about a time has no direction in space. Time has a direction in time, but not in space, and vice versa. Again, according to the reciprocal system, when you cross into a different region of space or of space-time, of motion, you have to invert space and time. And so that is the reciprocal relation, just like 2/3 and 3/2 are reciprocals of each other. Actually, it should not be difficult to get away from the habit of always interpreting direction as meaning direction in space when we are dealing with motion. We already recognize that there is no spatial connotation attached to the term when it is used elsewhere. We habitually use direction and directional terms of one kind or another in speaking of scalar quantities, or even in conjunction with items that cannot be expressed in physical imagery at all. We speak of wages and prices as moving in the same direction, temperature as going up or down, a change in the direction of our thinking, and so on. Here we realize that we are using the word direction without any spatial significance. There should be no serious obstacle in the way of a similar conception of the meaning of direction in time. In this edition, the term direction will not be used in referring to the deviations upward or downward from unit speed. Okay, direction will not be used in referring to the deviations upward or downward from unit speed. In the other senses in which the term was originally used, it seems essential to continue utilizing directional language, but as an alternative to the further limitations on the use of the term direction that have been suggested, we will use qualifying adjectives wherever the meaning of the term is not obvious from the context. On this basis, vectorial direction is a specific direction that can be fully represented in a stationary coordinate system. Scalar direction is simply outward or inward, the spatial representation of positive or negative scalar magnitudes, respectively. Wherever the term direction is used without qualification, it will refer to vectorial direction. If there is any question as to whether the direction is scalar or vectorial, or whether the direction under consideration is a direction in space or a direction in time, this information will also be given. Vectorial motion is motion with an inherent vectorial direction. Scalar motion is inward or outward motion that has no inherent vectorial direction, but is given a direction by the factors involved in its relation to the reference system. This imputed vectorial direction is independent of the scalar direction, except to the extent that the same factors may, in some instances, affect both. As an analogy, we may consider a motor car. The motion of this car has a direction in three-dimensional space, a vectorial direction, while at the same time it has a scalar direction in that it is moving either forward or backward. As a general proposition, the vectorial direction of this vehicle is independent of its scalar direction. The car can run forward in any vectorial direction or backward in any vectorial direction. If the car is symmetrically constructed so that the front and back are indistinguishable, we cannot tell from direct observation whether it is moving forward or backward. The same is true in the case of simple scalar motions. For example, we will find in the pages that follow that the scalar direction of a falling object is inward, whereas the scalar direction of a beam of light is outward. If the two happen to traverse the same path, in the same vectorial direction, as they may very well do, there is nothing observable that will distinguish between the outward and inward motion. In the usual situation, the scalar direction of an observed motion must be determined from collateral information independently of the observed vectorial direction. The magnitude of a simple harmonic motion, like that of any other motion, is a speed. The relation between the number of units of space and the number of units of time participating in the motion. The basic relation, the one unit of space per unit of time, always remains the same. But by reason of the directional reversals which result in traversing the same unit of one component repeatedly, the speed of a simple harmonic motion, as it appears in a fixed reference system, is 1 over x, or x over 1. This means that each advance of 1 unit in space, or time, is followed by a series of reversals of scalar direction that increase the number of units of time, or space, to x, before another advance in space or time takes place. At this point, the scalar direction remains constant for 1 unit, after which another series of reversals takes place. Okay, we're going to leave it off there. Just pointing out again, this is the difficulty of arriving at a new theory of everything. You have to come up with the language for it. And he's spent how many ever paragraphs trying to define just the term direction and how he's using it and how it's different. And so it's got to be frustrating for him having these great ideas, having to spend his time doing this. Okay, have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.